Okay, we're looking at a redaction of another paper here from late 2015 in late 2017. And it says first DNA extracted from an ancient African skeleton shows widespread mixing with Eurasians. And I made a comment not on this exact paper from this person here before onto it, but it has a redaction, so I want to go through it and see what it says, and it's going to talk about it from a different viewpoint than we have before, just because it's a different reporter, and in the same fact, it's going to show you the same information, but the redaction, and be more clarifying to what's going on. And I'll be clarifying what they're talking about as it goes through, and so on, and probably tell you whenever I disagree. It tells you Africa is the birthplace of our species and the source of ancient migrations that span the globe. Well, I disagree, or the scientists do. The ancient hominid, not humans, but the ancient hominids that predate the ancient hominids that predate the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthals and all of that are found out in Eurasia, predating the ones that are in Africa. And it looks like five some ice ages ago that they had migrated into, and because of that pinch up there at Egypt, never really migrated back out. And of course, you can get lost in Africa. It's a huge continent. It'd be like saying, Eurasia. And I mean, you could go forever, lifetimes and lifetimes. So they got they stayed down in one area. The hominids changed, and then there was different integrations that came in and out and in and out. And so it seems like it was a in and out of Africa kind of thing instead of just an out of Africa situation, but it still has the same thing. And then the ancient hominids where we're at, the Neanderthal genomes and things showed us that that had been separated for quite some time. Anyhow, it tells you, but it had missed out on a revolution in understanding human origins, the study of ancient DNA. And people, I mean, archaeology and stuff, and the studies I do, and people that go through everything in linguistics and so on, it can only go back to a certain point. When you know some people were speaking a language or had it written down in any way, you try to get past that point, and now we're looking at pottery and making up stories and trying to trace people in a certain area. If you had a piece of written thing, it could tell you, we ran here from so and so, or we ran from so and so, and you could even make up a story out of that somehow. But anything just finding pottery just goes about to zilch, and then that kind of goes away, and pottery changes, so you can't keep up with that perfectly. But one thing that does show you almost perfectly is if you can find genomes, and we've been able to do it with Neanderthals and stuff, and it's been hard to get it out of anybody that lives closer and closer to the equator because of the heat and things. Stuff lives longer in a refrigerator. It's just kind of that effect. It's been baked out of pretty much everywhere else, but they find it in certain bones. They're going to have tightened marrow and bones in your inner ear and places like that. So, anyhow, so although researchers have managed to sequence the genomes of Neanderthals from Europe, prehistoric herders from Asia, and Paleo-Indians from Americas, Africa's hot and humid climate has left the ancient DNA intact for scientists to extract. They left little for it. As a result, Africa was left out of the party, says anthropological geneticist Jason Hodgson of Imperial College London. And well, that's not really true. I mean, I guess we look at it, and the oldest Negroid skeletons that we find really are in the 4200 to 4600 range, I believe, BC. And then there's some gaps and a few proto-Negroids, and the oldest proto that we find, meaning kind of like a Cro-Mag or even, something like that, is like 11,600. So they give a range there, 12,000 BC, let's say. And so you find that there's this odd range here. Whenever old Caucasian, they find the Hofmeyr site shows Caucasians way down in the sub-Saharan Cape area of eastern sub-Saharan Cape there. Hofmeyr site shows people there at 40,000 BC, Caucasians. And there's a Blombos rock area down in the Cape, and all the way down at the point. That shows a red ochre type setup and everything. No burial, or, well, with the sea being right there on them and stuff, it wouldn't have lasted. And of course, that's real close to the equator and so on too, and just really wasn't going to make it. But the red ochre symbolism is still there from these people. Anyhow, so It's not that they were necessarily left out of the party in that way, but I guess left out of the party in the fact that you find their genetics going all the way up to Europe and so on. And that's true. Sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, if you look at even Herodotus's maps, it doesn't look like they even really knew that it existed. It kind of cuts off. They kind of go, it goes to the Sahara and that's it. And they kind of round it off. They don't show any of it. And there's no real mention of it and so on, although they deal with Nubians. It's really the only ones they deal with. And then so on. They talk about Ethiopians, but then again, Ethiopians are anybody with a tan skin to these pale Greeks. They talk about swarthy or tan or Ethiopian people that are in eastern Ethiopia or down near India and so on. And you look in India and there's darker skinned people there that are they're hooked up with ancient Denisovans and so on. So are the Aboriginal people of Australia, and a lot of the Fiji Islanders and the Islanders have that darker skin. And for a long time, people said, "Well, it must be that it has to be Negroids," but no, it's an ancient Denisovan race that is kind of a ghost species now. It's lost its place or whatever. Well, they're just extinct. They're gone. They're no longer here. And but their trace leaves on with that. And there's a trace in ancient Negroids that doesn't show up in Cro-Magnon or anybody or any of the white people that shows an ancient ghost species too. But I thought the clarification of this was going to show you that they do have some, and they thought it went into pygmies, but it doesn't quite. Let's see here. When compared with the genomes until now, a paper published onto this week in Science reveals the first prehistoric genome from Africa, that of Mota, that's the name they gave for him, yeah, a hunter-gatherer man who lived 4,500 years ago in the highlands of Ethiopia. Named for the cave that held the remains, the Mota genome is an impressive feat, said Hodgson, who was not involved in the work, but it gives our first glimpse into what an African genome looked like prior to many of the recent population movements, and when compared with the genomes of living Africans, it implies something startling. Africa is usually seen as a source of outward migrations, but the genome suggests a major migration into Africa by farmers from the Middle East, possibly 3,500 years ago, and these farmers' DNA reached deep into the continent, spreading even to the groups considered to be isolated, such as the Khoisan of South Africa and the Pygmies of the Congo. Yeah, and I showed you one here recently, and that is one of the attaching papers that showed me this. And the redaction now that's on this attached to the other thing, and I got that. So it's like, okay, so they're clarifying, but that still has it in there. But I believe the clarification was that the Pygmies of the Congo is not from the same group, although there is an infraction with them. It's not from the same group, and that their equipment that they used or something just picked out all Eurasian DNA totally and just said here and said, yep, and marked it, as opposed to picking it apart and making it different. And some other doctor that was doing another thing onto it that knew well those genomes and that exact set there that had something to do with the department or something, made a note of it. She said, oh yeah, well, kind of show me. And he kind of showed her and she goes, okay, and so they redacted it, and it wasn't even much longer. I'm not sure. So I hope this isn't one of those papers that goes on for 3 or 4 paragraphs and then go, well, that's what they used to think, but, because right here it says until now, so I thought we were going there, but maybe they're redacting the redaction. Let's continue. Our anthropologists John and Catherine Arthur of the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, discovered the skeleton in 2012 at Mota Cave in southwest Ethiopia after the Gamo elders led the pair to the cave, a hiding place for the Gamo during the war times. The Arthurs unearthed the skeleton of an adult male between a stone layer and dated it to 4,500 years ago using radiocarbon. So this had been like 2,500 BC, pretty much like, I don't know, pyramid times, after Egypt had gotten going, but yeah. The researchers analyzed the petraeus bone of the inner ear, which can sometimes preserve more DNA than a lot of other bones. The DNA had indeed survived in the inner bone, perhaps aided by the cool temperatures in the highland caves. Researchers were able to sequence each DNA base more than 12.5 times on average, considered a high-quality genome. And yeah, so they were able to replicate it quite well. When the population geneticist Andrea Manica and graduate student Marcos Gallego Lorente at the University of Cambridge in the UK analyzed the sequence, They found that the Mota had brown eyes and dark skin, as well as 3 gene variants associated with adaptation to high altitudes. Some peaks in the highlands reach 4,500 meters, as high as the Matterhorn. And yeah, there are some mountains there that get snow and things onto them. And it's not, most of Africa is pretty flat, except for, way up north in the northwest, there's the Atlas Mountains, attached to Atlantis and so on, and a few others and some escarpments, but there's not that many giant peaks in there. And there's an area in Ethiopia that does have a highland effect. And what this shows too, it's odd that these people pre to this point, this person must have lived somewhere else that had a lot of mountains, to have been cold and mountain adapted more, like all the Caucasians are whenever they look at the femurs and all the things about them and stuff, or he had lived in this area long enough that he had adapted to it in this locale. One of the two. But then, well, let's just go on with it and see what he says, or what they say. By comparing 250,000 base pairs from Mota's genome with the same sites in individuals from 40 populations in Africa and 81 populations from Europe and Asia, the team found that Mota was most closely related to the Ari, an ancient ethnic group that still lives nearby in the Ethiopian highlands. They zeroed in on the DNA that the Ari carry, but Mota doesn't. So the variation in the split between that, what's different about it, which was presumably added during the past 4,500 years, they found that Mota lacks about 4 to 7% of the DNA found in the Ari and all other Africans examined, and by that they mean sub-Saharans or Negroids. This new DNA most closely matches that of modern Sardinians and a prehistoric farmer who lived in Germany. Hints of these early farmers' DNA had previously turned up in some living Africans, but the Mota helped research zero in on the farmer's genetic signature in Africa to establish when it had arrived. So I'm guessing that's the redaction here, is that they've pegged it now to Sardinians and a prehistoric farmer that they have already had the full genome set of, and it's like, wow, it's these people, right? So Monica suggests that both the European farmers and living Africans inherited this DNA from the same source, a population in the Middle East, perhaps Anatolia or even Mesopotamia. Some of these Middle Easterners headed into Europe and Asia starting 8,000 years ago and were the first farmers of Europe. But the other descendants of this population migrated into Africa, likely after the Mota lived, and this fits all traces of Middle Eastern grains found in Africa and dated to 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And this is what I've been trying to show you in the Sumerian things, and how they had come down and brought the cattle and the grain and things right about this time here. That's a little bit predating, but they still had connections with each other. But you can imagine how far that is and how far flung that is. If you tried to have correspondence with somebody before they had the writing, you literally had to tell somebody what to say, and you had to expect them to take the trip all the way over there, some weeks and weeks sometimes, and then get there and then present yourselves good, and so on. But then later it became easy to write down, and the king could put his stamp on it, the ancient cylinder seals, and they could say, here's what he says, here's his little thing, ving, and show you and everything. And that adapted into having scrolls that had the ring that was pressed into the wax and so on after that. But I'm going off in left field. Let's continue. Because so many far-flung Africans still carry the farmer's DNA, the study suggests a huge migration, Monica says. Farming had already been established in Africa by this time, but the newcomers likely had some advantage that explains why their genes spread. It must have been lots of people coming in, or maybe they had new crops that were very successful, Monica says. Well, they were the first successful hunter-gatherers turned into farmers, and blending the two together in places that had fertile fields and helping people out in every area that they touched. This was the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and it wasn't something they did once on a Thursday either. Population geneticist David Reich of Harvard University is struck by the magnitude of the mixing between Africans and Eurasians. He noted that a profound migration of farmers moving from Mesopotamia to North Africa has long been speculated, but he says a Western Eurasian migrating into every population they study in Africa, into the Mobutu Pygmies and the Khoisan. That's surprising and new. Well, yeah, and I thought this was going to be a redaction that showed you that the people that had bred with the Mobutu Pygmies and the Khoisan were more of a Western Eurasian people, and the ones that did the Khoisan were from the earlier people that were the same people, but from the Eurasian people. No, I'm sorry, the Mbutu thing would have been predated to the Khoisan one, that were from the same genetics, but I don't know. So that would have been surprising and new if they would have put that. Yeah, okay, so let's go on. Migrations into and out of Africa were likely complex and ongoing. The study is significant on its own, Hodgson says, but hopefully it is only just the beginning of ancient African genomics. Well, yeah, they did the ancient Egyptians, and which are, of course, Caucasians. And the thing that's been hidden for a long time is the fact that a lot of them, especially the early ones, had blue eyes and blonde and red hair, and Seti and Ramses had red hair and so on. And the current population doesn't. Well, most people do know that those are an Arabic people that had moved in there way after Alexander the Great and things, and the fall of the Roman Empire much later and so on, right? But no, everybody wants to kind of forget that situation and act like they were the ones that were there. And they do have some genetic connection with people who are there due to the same type of fluff, but there is also the ancient genomes show that they are more of a Western Eurasian type thing through Anatolia and the people of the Levant of a long time ago. Whenever they find those skeletons from a long time ago, they're like, yep, pretty much there. In fact, Herodotus said the Colchians were the same people as the Egyptians, and they had tan skin and curly hair just like a lot of people around there, and that really wasn't that significant. But the significant thing was that they did linen in the exact same way, and they practiced circumcision and did some other rituals and stuff, and that they asked them about it, and yeah, they both remembered the situation and thought it had to do with Sesostris' army, but then they also noted that they had been there a whole lot earlier than that. And then, of course, there's the Mitanni that are known to have had princesses that ended up siring some of the Egyptians through time. And so when they looked at this genome sets that they did, they were trying to see the difference of before any interaction with like the Hyksos, and and then go down through time whenever they eventually did have the Ethiopians take over with Taharka, and he even had some Nubians with him and so on, that were finally allowed into Egypt. And all of the genomic data that would come after that with Akkadians and Persians, then Greeks, then the Romans, and that they would be able to look at this and look at ancient Roman and other genetics and then go, okay, this is how things go together. And by finding just that one, then applying that to other places and go, oh, and so it would show you exactly how things line up, because they can find this change down a line of these one certain people. Well, the startling thing was, as I finally get to it, the startling thing is that it didn't really change much at all through the whole thing, and then the Negroid admix shows up to be actually after the time of Christ, in 300 or 400 AD, right, coming to the edge of the Islamic slave trade, so which startled everybody somewhat. And then, of course, they checked the genome data, and it shows up to be Western Eurasian, and King Tut shows up to be like that, and it's kind of odd, but here, pardon me, let's continue. Oh, here's the update. Okay, on 1st of February, 7 a.m. Okay, so that, ta-da, right here. The authors of the paper reported that this has an unidentified error in their analysis, now conclude that the prehistoric back migration of West Eurasian farmers to Africa was less extensive than initially reported. It did not reach Central and Western Africa, such as the Mbuti Pygmies or the Yoruba people of Western Africa. Oh, okay, so yeah, like I was saying, and it's supposed to be somebody different. So let's see if they go on and tell you about that. The error was spotted by researchers at Harvard University who could replicate the results and notified the authors, who then checked their analysis. Co-author Andrea Monica, a population geneticist at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, has posted a note online explaining the incompatibility between the two software packages used to compare Mota's genome with a reference human genome led to the software program to simply drop certain DNA variants. And I think that's what I was telling you about, and that was the other connective thing that was on there, and that was part of the part that I knew, but they don't. Okay, with the result that all living Africans seem to have inherited some Eurasian DNA than they actually did. Okay, but the West Africans do have a component. Let's see. So there's no longer any West Eurasian ancestry inferred in the West and Central African population, says Harvard population geneticist Pontus Skolin, who alerted Monica to the problem. The genome sequence is otherwise beautiful, and the link between the Mota and some East African populations remains robust. This is how the scientific process goes sometimes. Well, yeah, but the next sentence, there's no longer any West Eurasian ancestry inferred in the West and Central African population, says Harvard population. The next sentence was supposed to be, it seems to be East Eurasian DNA and an unknown ghost species that is still, at this point, yet to be identified. And that unidentified species, what the weirdo thing here, people, is that it's not a direct cross reference. It seems that the West Eurasian thing happened so early in time that these fully modern Caucasians had come down into Africa again in a back migration and mated with a hominid type, okay? And that hominid type got DNA that was untouched by Neanderthal and contains alleles not found in Cro-Magnon. And therefore, it has to be an unrelated attachment that no longer exists, and some ghost hominid that we can't even identify, but that bred with another hominid species that is proto to the proto-Negroid that we talked about, that's 12,000 BC, if that could get any more complicated. And you know, we know about the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon. Hey, you got 4% DNA from there. You know, really, most Caucasians now have like 1.5 to 6%, I think, is your average spin, and most people have less than 4. And so it's just a small thing, but they found it. And whenever they did the genome on the Neanderthal, ping, they found it. There are certain sequences that go. I mean, there's all these. If you've ever seen DNA, there's just a few simple things, and there's sequences that run over time. And it's almost like, well, you know, where I try to put in a popular song into my vids and they just pick it up real quick? There's something smarter than that. That's a machine that whenever you run this zillion line DNA code through there, the gazillion lines, that it picks up and it goes, hey, this is that song. Well, no, it's not this. It's not even the same people. And they're like, yeah, well, they stole the damn Huey Lewis in the song right here. Look, it's got that same part right there. They're not saying the same words, but listen to this part right here. That's the same. Same beat, same progression, same note, same tone. There it is right there. It's just simple as that. So it picks up things like that. So it's kind of neat. And anyhow, I thought they'd share this with you, and I thought the redaction was someplace else, and they're not going to mention this, so apparently a whole nother paper's coming out, oh no, of the pygmies of the Congo, and how that and the Yoruba tribe actually have certain alleles that are shown that actually aren't in the ancient thing. Oh, so this is where they're, oh no, what's this? Echoes of HIV. Invasive non-typhoidal salmonella spread among similar routes as AIDS virus. Okoro and others. Nature Geneticist. Advanced online publication 2012. Oh, so they're I can only infer without reading the thing here, but I know that it started way back in the 80s. Okay, so from 80 to 2003, and this is the way it looks. Okay, so What they're saying here, basically, without going into it, because I don't want to even probably do one on this, is that I think the same migration routes and the same routes that AIDS took and spread out, that salmonella that spread out that they had there, and I'm sure that Ebola and things like that will spread along these same routes, and that there must be a trade connection going on with this. Interesting. Yeah, but first DNA extracted shows you that and everything, and I can't wait for them to get a few more versions of it. I think it'll really show us quite a bit. Like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy, and peace.